I have known my friend Sherlock Holmes for 15 years and consider my understanding of him as full as any single person on this earth. However, I must confess that much of his private life, which is to say almost the entirety of his life, as he is nothing if not private, is yet unknown to me. Consequently, the instances of Holmes greeting a visitor to our rooms as an old friend are few. A notable example of this phenomenon was in the case of the Haltmere Fetch, my account of which begins with an encounter with a childhood friend of Holmes's, but which I have no plans to publish due to the great sensitivity of matter. What I mean to say by this preamble is that if Sherlock Holmes greets a visitor warmly, I am minded to take particular notice, in the hope of gleaning some speck of detail that might be added to his biography. In the mid-morning of March 16th, 1896, we were working at our own desks. I compiling notes on one of Holmes's previous cases, and Holmes occupied intently on an unknown task, writing furiously in a jotter. We might not have spoken until luncheon had we not been interrupted by the ring of the doorbell. I heard the tread of several pairs of feet up the stairs. Then our housekeeper opened the door to our rooms. "A client for you, Mr. Holmes," Mrs. Hudson said. "A Mr.?" Her words were cut off abruptly as the white-haired man she had escorted upstairs pushed past her and into the room. Our housekeeper folded her arms over her chest in exasperation and stared at the intruder's back, then flinched as a second man eased his way past her, carrying a heavy wooden crate, and moved to stand at one side of the room. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson," I said hurriedly. When scorned, our housekeeper's annoyance is liable to manifest in other ways, and she had promised steak pie for lunch. She grimaced at our visitors again, then left and closed the door with more force than necessary. I turned in my seat as the white-haired man strode to the center of the room, looking about him as though the furnishings and hanging pictures were of equal interest as the two human occupants. On closer inspection, I saw that he was not as elderly as he had at first appeared, though his hair was bushy and wild, and his pointed beard equally as white, and long enough to almost entirely obscure his necktie. His skin was relatively smooth, and his eyes alert and intelligent. He wore a good suit and waistcoat, and beneath his arm he carried a large leather portfolio. His eyes passed over me, then fixed upon Holmes. "I have come to seek your assistance." His voice was halting, as though this was the first time he had spoken today, and his accent was difficult to place. Holmes watched him for several seconds, then leapt from his seat to shake the newcomer by his hand. "My word," he exclaimed. "You're just the person I need." I paid close attention immediately, waiting to see what our visitor's response might be. His face was a picture of confusion, but to his credit, he bowed his head politely and said simply, "Oh, how is that?" Holmes gestured to the jotter on his desk. "I'm currently preparing notes on a monograph relating to the uses of collodion. Not only the more conventional uses, but also in the cleaning of lenses in theatrical makeup, both as a fixing solution and to simulate wrinkled skin when allowed to harden in blasting gelatin, and also its potential use in the treatment of warts. It is a wondrous material, is it not? And you would be ideal in advising about one of the historical aspects of my treatise, namely the importance of the differences between wet plate and dry. To add to the mystery of how the men knew one another, I understood very little of what my friend had said. I glanced at the second visitor, who seemed content to guard in silence the wooden chest he had placed on the floor beside my desk. He appeared to be in his late 30s and wore round spectacles. The white-haired man nodded stiffly. "I would be happy to impart what knowledge I have in due course." Holmes had the good grace to let the subject drop. "You have come about another matter, of course. Please sit and tell us all." As our guest sat before the fireplace, I rose and took my usual chair, and Holmes took his. The white-haired man was unhurried and did not speak. Instead, he gazed around the room again, then at Sherlock Holmes, a faint frown upon his face. Then he rose nimbly, went behind Holmes's armchair, lifted my friend's prize Stradivarius. I gasped involuntarily, and then he simply placed it down again, several inches to the right from its original position. On his return to his seat, he similarly adjusted a lamp upon the dining table. He sat and his eyes traveled around the room again, but now he appeared content. Holmes watched all of this strange behavior placidly. "Excuse me," I said, "but am I to take it that you know one another already?" The visitor replied, "No, but it seems that we are both aware of the other's features. Your newspaper caricatures are as ugly, yet revealing as my own, Mr. Holmes." Bemused, I turned to Holmes, who shook his head. "I'm not in the habit of reviewing ironic commentaries, and any details to be gleaned from caricatures are decidedly secondhand. No, I recognize you not from your face, but from other salient details. I have heard much of your gift for observation," our guest said with a nod of satisfaction. "Please explain." Holmes tapped a finger against his lips. "I may as well proceed in the order that details presented themselves to me. Your right eye is the first indication of your trade, or rather, the brow above it, which is considerably more lined than above the left, which indicates long hours spent squinting or looking into a lens of some description. The same applies to many seamen who habitually use telescopes or sextants, but your manner otherwise is entirely unlike a sailor's. I noted next that your eyes moved around the room in constant observation, and at the same time your mouth twitched as though determining some features to be to your satisfaction and others an outright annoyance. Then you spoke, and in your accent I detected English. Fundamentally so in the vowel sound O and come, indicating that you were brought up in the southern regions of this country. And then, layered upon that, hints of more than one American accent, a harsh insistence indicating time spent in the vicinity of New York, and yet at the same time, a softened T, which suggested exposure to the accents of the West Coast. Although I'd seen this sort of trick performed many times over, the fact that Holmes could draw so much from a single uttered statement still seemed a miracle. However, our guest merely nodded and waited for Holmes to continue. "Then there is the matter of the object you were carrying," Holmes continued, indicating the leather portfolio which our visitor had now leant against the side of his chair. Its size is notable, of course, but what was more immediately arresting was the pasted paper on its upper corner. The white-haired man frowned and raised the portfolio, which was evidently heavy, onto his knees. He and I both looked closely at the traces of paper that Holmes described, which had been mostly removed, leaving only faint hints of lines. "It is clear that it once displayed a circular design," Holmes said, "and within it an image of a tower of some sort. It is a seal related to one institution or another, but which? The only text legible is in the upper left segment of the circle, and appears to read Sita's pen, which can only lead to one conclusion." "I'm most impressed," our guest said. I clear my throat. "Apologies, what is the institution then?" Holmes replied before I had even finished speaking. He must have anticipated my question. The circular text once read, Universitas Pennsylvaniensis, and the unusual tower is a tower of books. It is, of course, the seal of the University of Pennsylvania. But what is of most interest is that the scuffs and weathering of the leather binder suggest that it has been in regular use for at least 15 years. Yet the particular design of this seal is an iteration which has been in use only during these last, let me see, 8 years. And the tearing of the pasted paper has been performed imperfectly at a much more recent time. He looked up at the ceiling and sighed. And then I am bound to confess that my knowledge of public figures played a part in moving from this set of general observations to a conclusion about your precise identity. Hurriedly, as though this confession about possessing some degree of general knowledge might amount to an admission of cheating, he added, "Though subsequently, I noticed the attention you paid to the movements of both my companion and I as we moved from our desks to these chairs, and I flatter myself that this may have provided the final clue even if I had not known of your personal history." With that, our guest pushed himself up from his chair again and approached Holmes to shake his hand. "It is a great pleasure to find myself in the company of somebody so attuned to the appearance of things," he said. Holmes's satisfied expression evaporated. "I'm occupied with the meaning of things, not simply their appearance." As am I. The man returned to his seat, and when he sat his posture was like that of a schoolboy eager to learn. For my part, I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. There is always a point during Holmes's parlor tricks when his audience loses its patience. The white-haired man turned to me. Mr. Holmes has correctly diagnosed my travels from England to America, with long periods spent on both the East and West coasts. And he has correctly identified that I may be considered both a man of the arts and a man of science. The mise-en-scene of any setting is as much of interest to me as the precise, measurable movements of the creatures within it, despite the latter having effectively become my trade. He reached out to offer his hand. I know that you are Holmes's biographer, Dr. Watson, and my own name is Muybridge. I cried out, staring at the man's outstretched hand without shaking it. He bowed his head and withdrew his hand. Edward Muybridge, at your service. I have seen a number of your photographs of human figures in motion, I said. They are much admired among the medical profession, as they reveal a great deal about the workings of the muscular structure that remains invisible to the naked eye, and which is impossible to determine when the body is at rest. And also, that is to say, I am sure that your pictures have much to offer artists, too, as you have suggested. I sensed that my cheeks were reddening as I saw in my mind of the pictures I had been shown of women going about everyday tasks. Those series of sequential pictures revealed ever more about the women's movements due to the models being entirely naked. I now recalled that they had been shown to me not in the company of fellow doctors as I had intimated, but at my club.